So I want to talk about that because above all, I think that's the most important thing we can be doing in 2020 and beyond. It's finding ways to create relationships with other people. And as a creator, you're doing a really good job of that. I'm just curious. You've been in podcasting a long time. What role does podcasting play in that relationship development stage of your career now?
It's huge. It's absolutely huge. My history with podcasting was very interesting. I started my show in July of 2010, and I only had time for one episode every other week, so a bi-weekly show. And I was blogging 3 times a week. That was my bread and butter, blogging. And I went to a conference a couple months after the podcast was launched. And at this conference, I found a number of people who knew who I was, and I started chatting with them. And all of them could not stop talking about the podcast, the stories I was telling in my podcast, and the things that they learned on the podcast. And I was like, well, what about the blog? I'm spending way more time there. I'm blogging 3 times a week. Like, is that cool? And they're like, yeah, but I mean, the podcast was really great. And when I think about it, I'm like, every time I get a piece of fan mail, it's always from a podcast listener. Every time I hear somebody say, I've been able to impact their lives, it's been because of, in fact, single episodes of the podcast that they've listened to, not the blog post that's top 5 ways to get more traffic from Facebook, but the story I told in these podcasts. And because podcasts are very intimate, it's the best way to scale intimacy. Yes, as a creator, it's one to many, but to the listener, it's a one-on-one. Right. And you consider that as the creator, and you start using words like you, because you listening to this or watching this right now can feel a little bit more connected to the people or the person that is hosting that show. And of course, if you can then combine that intimacy with helping and providing value, and also speaking the same language that person can really resonate with, then that's when a person goes, oh my God, this is the person that I need to be following. This is the program that I want to get in. This is who I think all my friends should know about. That's where word of mouth really comes into play. It's everything to me. Without my podcast, I would definitely not be where I'm at today. And this is why I'm so adamant about teaching other people how to podcast, because it's definitely, even though numbers wise, it's still very early in the days of podcasting. There just crossed 1 million overall podcasts in April of 2020. Compare that to 500 million active blogs or 43 million active YouTube channels. We are still in the early days. And so it's those who are getting on now, who are developing those relationships, who have people's attention for much longer than a video or a blog post. Those are the ones who are going to win, because those people become super fans who will follow you and support you no matter what happens with technology later. This is what we're building, is what I like to call business insurance, is those relationships that you build.
Absolutely genius. It's definitely been my experience as well. Listen, everyone, you definitely got to check out all the tips, tools, and tactics that Pat's given you. smartpassiveincome.com. He's just laying it all out. Pat, I'd be remiss if I let you go without asking you a quick Back to the Future question. All right.
Oh, please.
I got to lay someone on you. If Doc Brown were to show up at your doorstep with that classic vehicle, got you into it and said, hey, Pat, you got 10 seconds with yourself 10 years ago, what would you tell yourself?
10 years ago?
10 years ago.
10 years ago, I would have just started my podcast, and I probably was thinking about giving up. And I would probably tell myself, hey, with the podcast that you're thinking of creating, I know it's hard. I know it's quite new for you, but keep going, because it's going to allow you to develop incredible relationships, not just with your audience, but with people who you invite on the show, who will then want to invite you on their show. And it's going to lead to book deals and even getting into Hollywood too. And one day you'll even get to drive for more than 10 seconds in this DeLorean as a result of the podcast, which actually indeed did happen. The podcast turned into something that allowed me to actually drive a DeLorean. If I could go back further, though, I would go back 20 years and tell my young self, who had just graduated high school, not to worry so much about what other people think of you. That was the thing that really held me back in high school, was worrying so much about what other people thought about me and not really getting in tune with who I was and what I wanted to do.
Powerful words. Powerful words. Pat, thank you so much for your time, brother. This was great.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everybody.